Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Agencies will soon get their first set of marching orders from President Donald Trump's executive order on artificial intelligence from earlier this week. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is expected to issue at least one binding operational directive as soon as today to direct agencies to secure large language models. For more on the BOD and other changes expected from the AI executive order, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller joins me now. Jason, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Terry.
The president signed the AI order on Tuesday, and now we're looking at actions coming out of it. What did it address, and what actually is CISA's role in meeting those new mandates?
The executive order called, AI, innovation, and security does several things, and people can read it. We have a link to it on federalnewsnetwork.com to make it easy, but here's a quick summary, Terry. It directs several agencies, including CISA, NIST, and NSA, to establish a voluntary system for government to evaluate advanced frontier AI models for cybersecurity risks before they're released publicly. Now, this framework needs to be in place in about 60 days. Under the framework, AI developers can emphasize or recommended to provide the government with access to the frontier models 30 days before they release the models to every other organization. The EO also directs the Treasury Department, working with NSA, CISA, and other agencies, to form a quote-unquote cybersecurity clearinghouse. Now, what this group will do is work with AI industry, critical infrastructure operators to coordinate on new software vulnerabilities, as well as prioritize patching and remediation of those vulnerabilities. Now, when you look at the entire EO and all, CISA is mentioned 5 times. Nick Anderson is the acting director of CISA and describes the role the agency will play in very broad terms.
When we start thinking about artificial intelligence security, there's a couple of different buckets. We think about working with frontier model companies and how do we ensure the security of the model themselves. How do we start talking about, the safety conversation that goes into that and what is potential risk with the model? Then we start talking about how can we actually use it as a force for good? How can we use it as a good defensive tool? And how is it going to both help us to reduce attack surface exposure? And then how can we actually use it in our operational needs day to day? And then we've got the third bucket of what to expect when you're expecting. How do we help provide advice to people on how to govern their own enterprises and how to think about things like data risk as they look to adopt artificial intelligence? So CISA is going to have a foot in every single one of those broad buckets, whether it is the clearinghouse type initiatives or it's going to be access to the models themselves, or again, how we're going to use them to so quickly help to drive down some of this tech debt that we've got.
Now, Anderson, speaking at the TechNet Cyber Conference Wednesday, sponsored by FCA, says this tech debt that every agency really is dealing with is the larger problem in securing AI models, but also the data and applications from AI attacks. He says for too long, agencies have, quote unquote, kicked the can down the road when it comes to getting off these legacy systems that, Terry, are harder to protect and secure.
So, Jason, tech debt's been a conversation for a while. Is that really part of the reason why the EO calls for CISA to issue this binding operational directive?
I think, Terry, that's a really good way to connect the dots, right? What Nick Anderson's saying, what the EO is calling for. And basically what we do know is this. Within 30 days, the EO says CISA will issue one or more BODs and other guidance to do several things. One thing it will do is expedite and prioritize cyber defense of civil federal systems. CISA also will establish and expand the federal programs and cybersecurity services that enhance AI-enabled defensive tools. And then finally, the EO says CISA will facilitate access to these cybersecurity tools and services, including, where appropriate, what would they call these covered frontier models for agencies, state and local authorities, critical infrastructure operators, including people like rural hospitals, community banks, and local utilities. Now, Anderson offered a little bit more insight around this upcoming BOD.
We're going to be rolling out, before the end of the week, some specific artificial intelligence platform access for our federal government-wide partners. We're going to be rolling out binding operational directives that are going to focus on vulnerability remediation and vulnerability management way forward, for our extended enterprise. And we've got, folks that are right here working as part of the cyber committee that are, here from CISA that are helping to modernize the approach that we're managing overall, federal security risk and how we're looking at our risk profile associated with system authorizations. All of these different elements fit together again into that. How do we integrate our government and how do we integrate our industry approaches in order to be able to deliver a more resilient enterprise?
Now, I caught up with Anderson after his speech and said, hey, what else you tell me about the BOD or BODs? And he said, there's not much more at this time, but obviously, Terry, we know that they could be coming as soon as today, maybe next week. Now, interestingly enough, the BODs really stood out to several industry folks, too, who commented on the AI executive order. Yijing Zhang is the vice president of government affairs at Abnormal AI. And Yijing says in an email statement that the BODs are really a marker. Zhang says the defense of our nation's vital functions will be carried out at speed and scale that only modern AI native capabilities can deliver. He says that in isolation, that there's a coherent modernization agenda that follows OMB's also recent memo on logging, addressing how agencies log cybersecurity data. Now, he goes, the through line is clear. The federal enterprise is moving away from collecting vast reservoirs of raw data that later need to be stitched together and more toward this idea of looking at the surface and where those holes are, cybersecurity challenges are, and dealing with it themselves. So I think, Terry, we'll see today, maybe early next week, what those BOD or BODs will tell us. But again, I think that the concern is real about agencies getting attacked by AI-fueled cyber adversaries, and they need to do something about it much more quickly.
To that point, Jason, do we know anything about how CISA is planning to help agencies secure their AI and be prepared for those kind of attacks?
Now, you heard Anderson talk about this new platform for agencies to access. And actually, I caught up with him after his speech and said, hey, if you can't tell me more about the BODs, what can you tell me about the platform?
One of the initial focus areas for us is going to be on how do we provide the right sort of platform for these types of AI capabilities to make them broadly available for federal civilian executive branch especially, so we can take advantage of the defensive capability it's going to give us access to and the ability to be able to manage that vulnerability environment that we see.
People think platform as like, oh, I go to a place and I get this, or like, what should we look for? Is that going to be public? Is it something that a vendor can see or that I can see, or is it more like behind the...
I think it's still going to be in flight right now as we continue to define that. I mean, the biggest focus for us right now is going to be how do we take that information about the attack surface and how do we take that information about vulnerability management, how do we put that in the hands of folks who can actually remediate that and start to buy down some of that risk on the federal civilian executive branch side, especially for our mission at first. And then how do we continue to build those partnerships as we continue to see this expand and evolve? Because we've been having the conversation primarily about a single vendor in the space and a single AI capability within the space. We're just going to continue to see American technology companies innovate on this and make capability that's going to continue to be greater. It's going to continue to exceed those benchmarks that we've seen. So really it's about building that repeatable process going into the future and not just a single point in time, a single tool, a single capability.
Now, Terry, he's referring to the Mythos, the Claude Mythos discovery from a few weeks ago that really drove a lot of this effort, really drove a lot of concern across the community about finding vulnerabilities that have been around for years that nobody knew about. So I think, Terry, there's more to come on the new platform, more to come on the BOD or BODs, and obviously CISA has plenty to do over the next few months between the EO and, of course, the new logging memo from OMB, where it has to develop or update an architecture for that agencies can follow around logging. Now, real quick, one piece of related news, and our colleague Justin Doubleday reported that DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullin recognized before the House Homeland Security Committee hearing on Wednesday that CISA needs more people, right? This BOD, this EO, this OMB memo is putting a lot of pressure on the agency. And Mullin says the agency needs to hire hundreds of additional staff to get to about 2,800 employees that he believes is necessary to carry out the mission. CISA staff has dropped from about 3,400 people before the beginning of the Trump administration to about 2,200 today.
They certainly are going to have their hands full.
Without a doubt, and I have a strong feeling we will see a lot more effort by CISA, a lot more from them in the coming weeks. And of course, if they put out that BOD, we will be reporting on it.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.
Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you think about leadership early on, saying, I need to be a great leader and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being a witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done. And you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves. And that made the task that much more achievable. There were several different circumstances in understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose, a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable, given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases, they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience.
A closing question. Who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So, inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all, somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.